My father spent decades mocking my career while I secretly paid off his mortgage to keep a roof over his head. At the family reunion, he finally screamed that I was worthless. I smiled, walked to my Porsche, and left them in the dust. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The steering wheel of the Porsche Panamera was cool beneath my palms, the leather soft and forgiving, a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I usually didn't drive this car to my parents' house. For the last 5 years, ever since my architectural firm, Haven and Stone, had finally broken through the 7-figure ceiling, I had maintained a carefully constructed charade. I would park my luxury vehicle in my own garage, rent a modest, dented sedan, usually a Ford Focus or a Honda Civic with high mileage, and drive that to the crumbling driveway of my childhood home. It was a tax I paid for peace. If I showed up in a car that cost more than my father, William, had made in his best 3 years combined, the dynamic would shift instantly. The mockery would turn to aggressive solicitation, or worse, he would accuse me of thinking I was better than them. But today was different. My usual rental agency had been completely booked out due to a massive convention in town, and I had come straight from a site visit with a client who was commissioning a sustainable glass-walled retreat in the mountains. I was wearing a tailored suit that cost $2,000, my heels were Italian leather, and I was driving a machine that purred with a quiet, lethal power. I turned the corner onto Elm Street, the familiar cracked pavement thumping rhythmically beneath my tires. I felt like an invader in my own history. This was the street where I had learned to ride a bike, where I had scraped my knees, and where I had learned, very early on, that nothing I did would ever be quite enough to eclipse the sun that shone out of my younger brother, Greg. I pulled the car over 3 blocks away from the house, parking it behind a large, overgrown hedge that bordered the community park. I couldn't risk parking in the driveway. Not today. The 4th of July barbecue was William's big event. The one day a year he held court like a king, surrounded by neighbors, distant cousins, and old work buddies. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes betraying a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with my 60-hour work week and everything to do with the emotional labor I was about to perform. "Just get through the appetizers," I whispered to myself, gripping the wheel one last time. "Just get through the speeches, then you can leave." I stepped out, the humid summer air hitting me like a physical wall. I locked the Porsche, the chirp of the alarm sounding strangely alien in this neighborhood of rusting pickup trucks and fading siding. I began the long walk to the house, my heels clicking on the sidewalk. As I approached number 402, I could hear the noise before I saw the people. Loud laughter, the sizzle of meat on a grill, and rising above it all, the booming, gravelly voice of my father. I told him, "Listen, buddy, you want it done right. You call a man who works with his hands, not some college kid with a computer." A roar of approval followed. I paused at the edge of the lawn, taking a breath that felt shallow and insufficient. I was the CEO of a company that was reshaping the skyline of the city, yet standing here, listening to that voice, I was 12 years old again, holding a report card with straight A's and waiting for him to ask why I wasn't good at sports like Greg. I walked up the driveway. My mother, a shadow of a woman who had long ago learned to shrink herself to fit into the spaces William left for her, was ferrying a tray of coleslaw to the picnic tables. She saw me, and her eyes widened, flicking instantly to my clothes. "Claire," she said, her voice a hushed hiss. "You're late, and look at you. You look like you're going to a funeral, not a barbecue." "Hello to you too, Mom," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I came straight from work." "Work," William's voice boomed. The conversation in the yard died instantly. He was standing by the massive smoker he had built himself, a beer in one hand, a pair of tongs in the other. He was a large man, physically imposing, with a face weathered by sun and a lifetime of stubborn grievances. He looked me up and down, his lip curling in that familiar mix of dismissal and amusement. "The princess graces us with her presence," William announced to the crowd of 30 people. "And dressed for a boardroom, no less. Tell me, Claire, did you draw some pretty pictures today? Did you color inside the lines?" The crowd chuckled. It was the standard opening volley. "It's good to see you, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "Happy 4th. Yeah, he waved a hand dismissively, turning his back on me to address his audience again. "Anyway, as I was saying, Greg is the one you need to watch. He's got an interview next week for a foreman position. Real responsibility, not this imaginary paper pushing." He pointed the tongs at Greg, who was lounging in a lawn chair, holding a beer, looking smug. Greg, who had been fired from 3 jobs in the last year and borrowed $2,000 from me last month for rent that I knew went to online gambling. I stood there, the heat rising in my cheeks, realizing that the suit, the car hidden down the street, the success I had clawed from the earth, none of it existed here. To them, I was just Claire, the one who played pretend. The betrayal of his dismissal wasn't new, but today, with the weight of what I was secretly carrying for them in my bank account, it cut deeper than usual. It was a sharp, physical pain in my chest. It was worse than the exhaustion. It was the realization that I could buy this entire block, yet I couldn't buy a single ounce of his respect. The first hour was a masterclass in endurance. I removed my blazer, draped it over the back of a plastic chair, and rolled up the sleeves of my silk blouse, trying to blend in. I went straight to the kitchen to help my mother, hoping to avoid the minefield of the backyard. The kitchen was chaotic, a mess of potato skins, half-empty mayonnaise jars, and dirty dishes piling up in the sink. My mother was frantically trying to butter corn cobs. "Here, let me do that," I said, gently taking the knife from her shaking hands. She looked at me, her eyes watery. "Your father is in a mood today, Claire. Just, please don't provoke him." "Provoke him?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Mom, my existence provokes him. I haven't said 5 words." "He's stressed," she defended automatically, the reflex honed over 40 years of marriage. "Money is tight. The roof needs patching again, and the property taxes went up." I paused, the butter knife hovering over the corn. Money is tight, the irony was so thick I could choke on it. "I thought Greg was helping out," I said, testing the waters, though I knew the answer. "Oh, Greg tries," she sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's just finding his footing. He needs our support right now. Your father thinks this new foreman job is the big break." "He doesn't have the certification for a foreman job, Mom," I said quietly. "I checked the listing. It requires a degree in construction management or 10 years of experience. Greg has neither." My mother stiffened. "Why do you always have to undermine him? Your father believes in him, why can't you?" "Because belief doesn't pay the bills," I muttered, turning back to the corn. I carried the tray of corn outside, weaving through the crowd. Uncle Roman was sitting near the cooler, nursing a soda. He was the only one in the family who didn't look at me with either pity or disdain. He was William's younger brother, a quiet man who had worked as a library archivist for 30 years. He was the black sheep for being bookish, much like me. "Nice suit," Roman murmured as I passed. "Business going well." I paused, giving him a genuine smile. "It is, Roman. We just landed the biggest contract in the firm's history, a net-zero residential complex in the valley." "That's incredible, Claire," he whispered, glancing at William to make sure my father wasn't listening. "You should be proud." "I am," I said. "I just wish." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. Roman nodded knowingly. "He won't change, kid, you know that." "I know," I said, "but it still stings." At that moment, Greg shouted across the yard. "Hey, Claire, grab me another brewski while you're up, will ya?" He didn't ask, he demanded. He was 30 years old, sitting while his older sister served him. I walked over, dropped a cold can into his lap a little harder than necessary. "You have legs, Greg." "Whoa, feisty," Greg laughed, cracking the tab. "Dad, Claire's being mean to me." William turned from the grill, his face flushed with heat and alcohol. Claire, don't start. It's a party. Stop acting like you're better than everyone just because you wear a suit. I'm not acting like anything, Dad. I'm just asking him to get his own drink. He's celebrating, William snapped. He's got big things coming. Maybe if you focused less on your little doodles and more on family, you'd understand what loyalty looks like. He turned back to his friend, a man named Miller who I vaguely remembered from my childhood. She's always been cold, selfish, thinks the world revolves around her career, doesn't understand the real world. I stood there, feeling the familiar burn of injustice. Selfish. They didn't know about the bank transfer set up to auto-draft on the 1st of every month. They didn't know that the property tax hike my mother complained about had been paid 3 weeks ago by me. They didn't know that the reason the bank hadn't foreclosed on this house 2 years ago was because I had stepped in and paid the arrears, totaling nearly $25,000. I had done it anonymously, through a lawyer, framing it as a restructuring of the loan so William's pride wouldn't be wounded. I had saved his ego at the expense of my own bank account. I looked at the back of William's head, at the sweat staining his collar. You call me selfish, I thought, a cold calm settling over me. But you forgot one crucial thing. I was the only reason they were standing in this backyard at all. If I stopped, the gravity of their own bad decisions would crush them within a month. And as I watched Greg toss his empty can onto the grass for someone else to pick up, I wondered for the first time, why am I still protecting them? To understand why I stayed, why I took the abuse, you have to understand the history. I wasn't just the daughter, I was the contingency plan that no one wanted to acknowledge. 10 years ago, when William hurt his back and was forced into early retirement, the family finances collapsed. I was 22, fresh out of architecture school, drowning in student loans and working as a junior draftsperson for peanuts. I watched my parents panic. I watched the lights get turned off. I watched them sell the family truck. I made a vow then. I would succeed so they wouldn't have to suffer. I worked 18-hour days. I took freelance gigs on weekends designing decks and garage conversions. I ate ramen and lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet so I could send money home. When I founded Haven and Stone, I didn't do it for fame. I did it because I needed leverage. I needed enough capital to create a safety net for them that was invisible because I knew William would rather starve than take a handout from his daughter. So I invented the lie. I told them I was getting by. I let them believe I was a struggling artist type. Meanwhile, I was quietly buying up the debt that threatened to swallow them. But sacrifice, I was learning, has a shelf life. The sun began to dip lower, casting long, orange shadows across the yard. The alcohol was flowing freely now, and William was in peak form. He had gathered a captive audience, Greg, Miller, Uncle Roman, and a few neighbors. I was sitting on the periphery, picking at a plate of potato salad when William waved me over. Come here, Claire, come here. I walked over slowly, my guard up. Miller was just asking about what do you call it, your shop? William grinned, his teeth slightly yellowed. It's an architectural firm, Dad, I corrected gently. Haven and Stone. Right, the firm, he used air quotes, making the word sound ridiculous. Miller here was telling me his daughter just finished nursing school. Now that is a job, you help people, you save lives. Steady paycheck, benefits, pension. Architecture is a stable field, Dad, I said, my voice tight. And we do help people. We design sustainable homes that reduce energy consumption. We create spaces for families. William snorted. You draw heavy lines on paper. Let's be honest. It's a hobby you turned into a job. But tell me, how's the money? Are you still driving that rental clunker? I saw a Ford out front earlier, assumed it was yours. He hadn't seen the Porsche. He assumed the worst, as always. I'm doing fine, Dad, I said. Fine, just fine. He laughed, looking around at the men for validation. See, this is what I mean. No ambition to settle down, no ambition to get a real trade, just fine. Greg here. He slapped my brother on the back, nearly knocking the wind out of him. Greg is going to be making 80 grand a year starting next month. 80 grand. Can you imagine? Greg smirked, looking down at his shoes. Yeah, it's gonna be sweet. "That's wonderful, Greg," I said, though I knew it was a fantasy. But until then. William's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean," I said, my patience fraying, "Greg has been about to start a big job for 5 years. Meanwhile, he lives in your basement." The air in the circle grew frigid. Miller looked away, embarrassed. William took a step toward me, invading my personal space. He smelled of cheap beer and charcoal smoke. He was the antagonist in my life story, not because he was evil, but because his worldview required my failure to sustain his own ego. If I was successful, his narrative that hard labor is the only real work fell apart. He needed me to be small so he could feel big. "You listen to me," William hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Greg has potential. He has heart. You're cold. You come here with your fancy nose in the air judging us, but looking at you. No husband. No kids, no house of your own, just a rental car and a sketchbook." He leaned in, his voice dripping with venom. "I bet you're barely making rent. I bet you're 1 month away from asking me for money. Well, let me tell you something, Claire. When Greg makes it big, don't come crawling to him." I looked at him. I looked at the man whose mortgage I held the deed to. I looked at the brother whose gambling debts I had cleared. "Is that what you think?" I asked softly. "You think I'm broke?" "I think," William said, raising his voice to a shout, ensuring the entire party was watching, "that you are a fraud, and you'll never amount to anything real." The silence in the backyard was absolute. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. 30 pairs of eyes were fixed on us, my mother frozen with a tray of watermelon, Uncle Roman watching with a mixture of horror and pity, and Miller looking everywhere but at me. William stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for me to crumble. He expected tears. He expected me to shrink away, to apologize for being difficult, to retreat into the kitchen and wash dishes like a good daughter. That was the script we had followed for decades, but something inside me had snapped. It wasn't a loud crack, it was the quiet click of a lock finally engaging. I looked at my father, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the bluster, the insecurity masked as dominance. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt bored. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Maybe I won't amount to anything." William blinked, thrown off balance. "What?" "Maybe you're right," I repeated, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "Maybe I should have listened. Maybe architecture is just drawing pictures. Maybe I should have found a husband who could take care of me." He frowned, sensing a trap but unable to see it. "Well, good, at least you admit it." "I do," I said. "And since I'm clearly struggling so much, I think it's time I stop pretending. I wouldn't want to embarrass you any further with my fake job." I reached into my purse, not for a tissue, but for my keys. The heavy, leather-bound fob of the Porsche Panamera felt cool and solid in my hand. "I'm leaving now," I announced to the group, keeping my tone light, almost cheerful. "I have an early meeting tomorrow with a client who actually pays me." "Yeah, run away." Greg jeered, emboldened by our father's silence. "Go draw some houses you'll never live in." I ignored him. I turned to my mother, who looked stricken. "Mom, I love you. Call me if you need anything, but I won't be coming back for a while." "Claire," she whispered, stepping forward, but I was already walking. I didn't storm off. I didn't stomp. I walked with the deliberate grace of a woman leaving a burning building she no longer had the energy to extinguish. I reached the sidewalk and turned right, toward where I had parked. "Where are you going?" William called out, confused. "Your car is the other way." He pointed toward the spot where I usually park the rental. I stopped and turned back one last time. "No, Dad, it's not." I pressed the unlock button on the fob. From 3 houses down, the distinctive chirp-chirp of a high-end alarm system cut through the evening air. The headlights of the sleek, black Porsche Panamera flashed, illuminating the overgrown hedge. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Heads turned. "That!" William scoffed, his laugh nervous. "That's not yours." I didn't answer. I just walked to the car, the heels of my shoes clicking a final rhythm on the pavement. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The roar of the twin-turbo V8 was a physical vibration that rattled the loose siding of the neighbors' houses. I rolled down the window as I pulled away from the curb, driving slowly past the house. They were all standing at the edge of the lawn now, mouths agape. William looked like he had been slapped. Greg's beer was halfway to his mouth, forgotten. I caught Uncle Roman's eye. He gave me a subtle nod, a small salute with his soda can. I didn't look at William. I didn't look at my mother. I put the car in drive and accelerated, the G-force pressing me back into the seat as I left Elm Street behind. 20 minutes later, I was on the highway, the city lights blurring past. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. I pulled over at a rest stop, my hands shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. I picked up the phone. 5 missed calls from Mom. 2 from Dad, 1 from Greg. And a text from Uncle Roman. "Do you know what he did after you left?" I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. "What?" I typed back. The response came immediately. "He told everyone it was a rental, said you were probably renting it to impress a boyfriend, said it was sad you had to fake it." I let out a harsh laugh in the quiet of the car. Of course he did. He couldn't process the reality, so he rewrote it. Then another text from Roman, but Miller asked to see the registration. He's a cop, remember. He ran the plate on his phone app. "It's registered to Haven and Stone Holdings, LLC. Your name is listed as the sole proprietor." I smiled. And Miller told the whole party. Said, "William, your daughter owns a company worth more than this entire neighborhood." You should have seen his face, Claire. He turned purple. He tried to say it was a mistake, but Greg looked sick. I put the phone down, leaning my head back against the headrest. The truth was out. The carefully maintained fiction that kept their egos intact had been shattered. But now the real work began, because William wouldn't take this lying down. He would attack. He would try to regain control. And I needed to be ready. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the family support account, the one that automatically paid the mortgage, the property taxes, and Greg's emergencies. I hesitated for a moment. This was the nuclear option. If I did this, there was no going back. They would lose the house. They would lose everything. "He called you worthless," a voice in my head reminded me. "He humiliated you in front of the people you grew up with. He laughed at your life's work." I took a deep breath. Cancel recurring transfer. Confirm. The screen flashed green. Success. The next morning, the silence from my family was deafening. I expected a barrage of angry texts, but instead, there was nothing. It was the calm before the storm. I went to work early, burying myself in blueprints for the mountain retreat. The clean lines and structural integrity of the design were soothing. Unlike my family, buildings followed rules. If you built a strong foundation, the structure stood. If you built on sand, it collapsed. Around noon, my assistant, Sarah, buzzed me. "Claire, there's a Mr. William here to see you. He says he's your father. He doesn't have an appointment." My stomach dropped. He had never come to my office. He didn't even know where it was, or so I thought. "Send him in," I said, straightening my blazer. William walked in a moment later. He looked smaller in the context of my office, a modern, glass-walled space overlooking the city skyline. He was wearing his Sunday best, a polo shirt tucked into khakis, but he looked out of place among the sleek furniture and architectural models. He didn't look angry. He looked confused. He looked around the room, taking in the awards on the wall, the framed magazine covers featuring my projects. "Nice place," he grunted, refusing to make eye contact. "Hello, Dad," I said, remaining seated behind my desk. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, the old reflex kicking in. "I came to talk about the car." "The car is fine," I said. "It's parked downstairs." "Miller says it's yours," he said accusingly. "Says you own this whole operation." "I do." "So you lied to us," he said, pointing a finger. "For years, you let us think you were struggling. You let your mother worry." "I never said I was struggling, Dad," I countered, my voice steady. "I said I was getting by. And I let you believe what you wanted to believe because it made you feel better. Because if I told you I made 5 times what you ever did, you would have hated me for it." "Hated you?" He laughed a bitter sound. I'm your father, I would have been proud. But no, you hid it. Why? So you could hoard it all, while your brother is out there busting his hump. Greg isn't busting anything, I said sharply. Greg is gambling away the money I send him. William froze. What? The $2,000 last month. The rent money 3 months ago. That came from me, Dad, not a friend. Not a loan. Me. You're lying, he spat. Greg is a good kid. He's had some bad luck. He has a gambling addiction, I said, sliding a folder across the desk. I have the bank statements. I have the transfer records. I've been covering for him for 2 years. William didn't open the folder. He stared at it as if it were a bomb. And the house, he whispered, his face paling. The mortgage. Paid by me, I said. Every month for the last 3 years, since the bank threatened foreclosure. You thought the bank just worked with you. No bank works with you for 3 years on a defaulted loan, Dad. I bought the debt. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. You bought the debt. He looked like he was trying to comprehend a foreign language. So, you own the house. Technically, yes, I said. Through a holding company, but I let you live there rent-free. I let you think you were still the king of your castle. William's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, denial, and finally, rage. His pride, the only currency he had ever valued, was revealed to be counterfeit. You, manipulative little. He choked on the words. You think you can just buy us. You think this makes you better than me. No, Dad, I said, standing up. I think it makes me the one keeping a roof over your head. The roof you told everyone I wasn't good enough to build. I don't need your charity, he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. I provided for this family for 40 years. I don't need my daughter playing God. Fine, I said, my voice ice cold. Then you won't mind that I canceled the payments this morning. The color drained from his face completely. You what? I canceled the auto draft, I repeated. If you don't need my charity, then you can pay the mortgage yourself. The next payment is due on the 15th. It's $2,400, plus the arrears I've been covering. We can't pay that, he whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of him. You know we can't pay that. Then maybe you should ask Greg, I said, sitting back down. He's starting that big foreman job soon, isn't he? 80 grand a year. William stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He looked at the folder on the desk. He looked at the office. He looked at me, really seeing me for the first time, not as his disappointment, but as the architect of his reality. You can't do this, he said, his voice trembling. It's your mother's home. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you told 30 people I was worthless, I said. I'm done paying for the privilege of being abused, Dad. Get out of my office. William left, but the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new front. By that evening, my phone was blowing up. My mother was calling, sobbing, leaving voicemails begging me to reconsider. Greg sent a text, you think you're so smart. Dad is going to fix this. Watch your back. I didn't reply. I forwarded the threat to my lawyer. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering. William, desperate and cornered, tried to get a loan to cover the mortgage. He failed. His credit was shot, destroyed by years of co-signing for Greg's failed ventures, another secret I had uncovered during my investigation. Then, the escalation came. I received a legal notice. William was suing me. He was claiming elder abuse and financial manipulation. He claimed I had tricked him into signing over the deed, which wasn't true. The bank had sold the debt to my LLC legally. He claimed I had stolen money from him. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to regain control, fueled by Greg, who I learned was feeding him these lies. Greg had convinced him that I had been siphoning off their retirement funds, funds that hadn't existed for a decade. I sat in my lawyer's office, reading the filing. It's baseless, Claire, my lawyer, a sharp woman named Jessica, said. He has no proof. We can crush this in court. I know, I said, rubbing my temples. But he's going to drag it out. He's going to make it public. He wants to shame me into submission. So what do? Jessica asked. Settle. No, I said. We don't settle, we accelerate. I pulled out a second folder. I need you to look into Greg's employment history, specifically the foreman job he claims to have, and I need you to subpoena his bank records." "Why?" "Because," I said, a dark realization dawning on me, "I don't think Greg just has a gambling problem. I think he's been stealing from them directly. And I think William knows, but he's blaming me to protect him." 3 days later, Jessica called me. "You were right, and it's worse than you thought." Greg hadn't just been gambling. He had opened credit cards in William's name. He had drained their small savings account 2 years ago. The property tax money I had sent. Greg had intercepted the mail and cashed the checks himself before I switched to direct wire transfers. William wasn't just protecting Greg, he was actively covering up a crime. He had chosen the son who robbed him over the daughter who saved him. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that I felt a strange sense of clarity. There was no saving this dynamic. There was only ending it. The court date for the initial hearing was set for the following week, but I didn't want to wait for a judge. I wanted to end this on my terms. I called Uncle Roman. "Roman," I said, "is the family still having the monthly dinner this Sunday?" "Yeah," he said, his voice wary. "But Claire, you shouldn't come. Your dad is. He's in a bad way. He's telling everyone you're a thief." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm coming, and I'm bringing someone." "Who?" "My lawyer," I said, "and a forensic accountant." "Claire, I'm going to finish this, Roman, once and for all. Will you be there?" There was a long pause. "I'll be there," he said softly. "I'll make sure the door is unlocked." Sunday arrived. I dressed in the same suit I had worn to the barbecue. Armor, I drove the Porsche. I didn't park down the street this time. I pulled right into the driveway, blocking Greg's truck. I stepped out, flanked by Jessica and a quiet man named David, the forensic accountant. We walked up the path. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The family was gathered in the living room: William, Mom, Greg, and a few aunts and uncles who looked uncomfortable. They froze as I entered. "What the hell are you doing here?" Greg shouted, jumping up. "Get out." "Sit down, Greg," I said, my voice echoing in the small room. "I'm calling the cops." William yelled, his face turning red. "Go ahead," I said, tossing a thick stack of papers onto the coffee table. "But you might want to read this first. It's the police report I'm filing tomorrow morning." The room went silent. "What is this?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "That," I said, pointing to the stack, "is proof that Greg has stolen over $40,000 from you in the last 3 years. Credit card fraud, identity theft, and forgery." "Liar," Greg screamed, lunging toward the table. David, the accountant, stepped forward calmly. "We have the bank records, Greg. We have the IP addresses used to open the accounts. It's all here." William stared at the papers. He didn't pick them up, he just stared. "And you knew," I said to William, "didn't you?" He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. "You knew he was stealing," I continued, my voice breaking slightly. "But you blamed the bank. You blamed the economy. You even blamed me for not helping enough. You let him rob you blind because you couldn't admit your golden boy was a criminal." "No," William whispered. I didn't know it was this bad." "You knew enough," I said. "And instead of stopping him, you sued me. You tried to destroy the only person who was actually keeping you alive." I looked at my mother. She was weeping silently, holding one of the bank statements. "I'm done, Mom," I said softly. "The house is legally mine. I'm evicting Greg, effective immediately. If he's not out in 24 hours, the police come for him." "And us?" she asked, her voice a ghost. "You can stay," I said, looking at William, "if and only if you sign this." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my pocket. "What is it?" William asked. "A public admission," I said. "You will retract every lie you told about me. You will tell the family the truth about who paid for this house. And you will apologize in writing." William looked at the paper. He looked at Greg, who was now cowering in the corner. He looked at the house he was about to lose. The silence stretched, thick and agonizing. The king was dead. Long live the truth. The silence in the living room was a physical weight, thick with years of unspoken resentments and the sudden, brutal clarity of the truth. My mother was sobbing quietly into a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking. Greg was staring at the floor, his face pale and slick with sweat, the bluster finally drained out of him. And William? William looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He stared at the paper in my hand, the admission, the retraction, the apology. It was a single sheet of paper, but it weighed more than the house itself. It was the cost of his pride. "You can't make me sign this," he whispered, his voice hoarse. This is humiliation." "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Humiliation was you telling 30 people I was worthless while I paid for the roof over your head. Humiliation was watching me struggle to build a career and calling it a hobby. This is accountability." "Please, Claire," my mother begged, looking up. "Don't do this to your father. He's old. He didn't know." "He knew enough to lie about me," I countered, not softening. "He knew enough to sue me. He knew enough to protect Greg while Greg robbed you blind." I turned to Greg. "Get out." "What?" Greg looked up, startled. "Get out of my house," I repeated. "Now, you have 10 minutes to pack a bag. If you're still here when the police arrive to take a statement on the fraud, that's your problem." "You can't kick me out," Greg shouted, looking at William for support. "Dad, tell her." William looked at Greg. He looked at the bank statements spread across the coffee table, the undeniable proof of thousands of dollars stolen, credit cards maxed out in his name, the gambling debts paid with his Social Security checks. He looked at the son he had championed, the golden child who had rotted the family from the inside out. Then he looked at me, the daughter he had mocked, the daughter he had dismissed, the daughter who was the only reason he wasn't homeless. "Dad," Greg whined. William closed his eyes. A single tear tracked through the stubble on his cheek. "Pack your bags, Greg," he whispered. "What?" Greg gasped. "Pack your bags." William roared, slamming his fist onto the armrest of his recliner. Get out before I kill you myself." Greg flinched as if struck. He scrambled up, knocking over a lamp in his haste, and ran toward the hallway. We heard the slamming of drawers, the frantic stuffing of clothes. William slumped back in his chair, defeated. He looked at the paper again. His hand shook as he reached for the pen I held out. "If I sign this," he said, his voice trembling, will you let us stay?" "You can stay," I said. "Rent-free, for as long as you need, but the house remains in my name. And Greg never sets foot in it again. If he does, you're out too." He nodded slowly. He took the pen. He signed his name at the bottom of the page, William Miller. Then he looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "I'm sorry, Claire," he choked out. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe he could do this. And I didn't want to admit that you were the strong one." "I know, Dad," I said softly, "but I am." The front door slammed. Greg was gone. The engine of his truck roared to life outside, then faded into the distance. I looked around the room. The air felt lighter. The tension that had suffocated this house for decades had broken. It wasn't a happy ending, there was too much damage for that, but it was an ending. The lies were gone. Uncle Roman, who had been watching silently from the corner, stepped forward. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, kid," he whispered. "You did good." I took a deep breath, feeling the knot in my chest finally loosen. "I'm tired, Roman." "I know," he said. "Let's go." I turned to leave. "Mom, Dad, I'll have Jessica draw up the lease agreement. It's just a formality to protect the asset. You won't have to pay anything. Just take care of yourselves." My mother nodded, unable to speak. William just stared at his hands. I walked out the door into the cool evening air. The Porsche was waiting in the driveway, a sleek, dark beast purring with potential. I got in, the leather seat hugging me like an old friend. As I backed out, I saw Uncle Roman standing on the porch, watching me go. He raised a hand in a silent salute. I didn't look back at the house. I looked at the road ahead. William was true to his word, or perhaps he had simply been broken enough to stop fighting. He told the family the truth, not all at once and not loudly, but the whispers spread. Claire bought the house. Greg stole the money. William was wrong. The lawsuit was dropped immediately. Jessica handled the paperwork with ruthless efficiency. The deed was secured, the trust established. My parents were safe, housed, and cared for, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer the child seeking approval, I was the benefactor ensuring survival. Greg didn't disappear quietly. He tried to crash a few family gatherings, tried to spin a sob story about addiction and misunderstanding. But the evidence was too damning. The police report I had filed, but held in abeyance as long as he stayed away, was a sword of Damocles hanging over his head. He eventually drifted away, moving 2 states over to live with a girlfriend who didn't know his history yet. I hoped, for her sake, she found out sooner rather than later. As for me, I threw myself into Haven and Stone. The Mountain Retreat project won an architectural award. We landed 3 more high-profile contracts. I bought a small, mid-century modern house in the hills for myself, a place with big windows and 0 ghosts. I still saw my parents, but on my terms. I visited for holidays. I brought nice wine. I drove the Porsche. One afternoon, about 6 months later, I received a text from William. It was a photo of the backyard. The grass was cut, the fence I had paid to repair was painted. Yard looks good, the text read. Thanks, it wasn't an I love you. It wasn't a you're amazing. But for a man who had spent his life speaking in grunts and criticisms, it was a monologue. I texted back, looks great, Dad. I put the phone down and looked out at the view from my office. The city was spread out below me, a grid of lights and possibilities. I had built this life. I had fought for it, and I had won. The victory wasn't in the money or the car or the house. It was in the freedom to be exactly who I was without apology. I picked up my pen and turned back to the blueprints on my desk. There was a new project starting next week, a community center in the inner city. Pro bono. Because I could, and because finally I amounted to something.